To give quite a bit of time for the OSAA.
3 days of hearings at the state capitol underscored the intensity of criticism leveled against the OSSAA. The interim study was requested by State Representative Bobby Cleveland, who voiced a number of concerns about the group, including how it shares revenue from state playoff games.
The way that the money is spent, how come OSAA has cars, big pension plan, high salaries, when our schools are absolutely, in the athletic departments, are having to go out and beg for money to help supplement their athletic program.
The organization has a membership of 481 public and private schools and an annual budget of just over $5 million, much of which comes from gate receipts of high school playoff games. State Representative Gus Blackwell chairs the House Administrative Rules Committee, which conducted the interim study. Blackwell argues the OSSAA changed its revenue-sharing policy 3 years ago without the consent of member schools.
They used to have football get 80% of the gates at the playoffs, and the OSAA would get 20. They sent out a question to their members, could they look at changing that? The members said, yes, you can look at changing that, but lo and behold, not only did they look at changing it, they completely reversed it.
OSSAA Executive Director Ed Shakely insists member schools voted for the change and argues the new revenue-sharing arrangement makes more money available to reimburse schools for other sports and activities.
We have now gone from 3 years ago, we were making reimbursements in 7 different activities for teams that were involved in the playoffs. This year is that we reimburse 13 different activities for teams that were involved, in the playoffs.
Kim Longest is president of the Oklahoma Football Coaches Association and a football coach at Duncan High School. Longest says the new revenue-sharing policy has left schools in a financial bind. He cites the example of Jinx, which won a state football title last year.
If they'd have just got 30% of their gate, just a round number, they would have got about $30,000. As it was, they got about $7,000. Okay, and Ringling, a little Class A school, they went to the state finals. They lost about $12,000.
Longest says those losses will be very difficult for some schools to make up.
That money's got to come from somewhere. It may come from the band. It may come from the swim team. It may come from maybe not being one teacher hired or something. Each school will have to make that decision. But yes, that money's got to come from somewhere.
The OSSAA has also come under fire for the way it deals with student athletes. The Oklahoma Supreme Court recently found the organization had been arbitrary and capricious in denying eligibility to Sequoia Tahlequah High School quarterback Braden Scott last year. The OSSAA alleged the school violated rules by paying for Scott and other students to attend football camps. Former Cherokee Nation Chief Chad Smith is Scott's attorney.
The Supreme Court found, as we argued at every step of the way, that 45 of those occurred before there ever was a rule. How more arbitrary and capricious and unreasonable could you be than to apply a rule retroactively?
In its opinion, the High Court warned the OSSAA it would face increasing judicial scrutiny. This court has permitted the OSSAA, in the guise of a voluntary association, to govern the affairs of secondary school athletics in Oklahoma with near impunity. No more. Others appearing before the Legislative Committee criticized the organization for the way it handles waivers to student athletes who transfer from one school district to another. Tony Dearman is principal of Riverside Indian School just outside Anadarko, which draws students from across the country. Dearman says the school had to cancel all of its football games this year because 9 of the 23 players had hardship waivers, which were awaiting OSSAA approval.
We think our kids have just as much right to compete and play as anyone. And all we would ask for is that someone sit down with us, look at our situations, look at where we get our kids from, and let's come up with something that would help our kids.
Shankly agrees the rules haven't always been easy to understand and insists the group is taking steps to address that.
One of the things that we're changing and that we heard from the committee is that you need to be more detailed on your explanation on why an appeal has been approved or been denied. So a parent, when they get that letter from the school, knows exactly, whether the documents that submitted either met the criteria or did not meet the criteria.
Shakely says OSSAA is also moving to increase transparency in its financial dealings and tighten its accounting procedures after the organization's former executive director was fired 4 years ago for misappropriation of funds.
We do have a new accountant in our office that works for us. We did change auditors from what we previously had. So we've made some changes and we've put in some checks and balances to ensure that what happened in the past doesn't ever happen again.
Shakely says the organization is considering additional changes and argues legislative oversight is unnecessary, contending the OSSAA is not a state agency.
We're a volunteer organization, we're a 501c3, organization. One of the concerns, has been is that, that you're a state actor. We're not a state actor. Again, we're a private organization.
That opinion appears to be at odds with the Supreme Court's ruling, which found because the source of funding of public schools is from Oklahoma taxpayers, the state of Oklahoma has an interest in ensuring that tax dollars are used by the OSSAA in a manner that is not arbitrary and capricious, but one that is fair and impartial. Meaningful review of the OSSAA's actions is necessary to ensure this. Blackwell intends to file legislation next session to provide more oversight.
I think you can see from the Supreme Court decision, there's a fatal flaw in the organization now. I think you can see from the embezzlement of the $500,000 by the previous director that there's a fatal flaw. And really, if you're on the inside looking out, it's really difficult to make those changes.
Blackwell doesn't know what form that legislation will take, but insists it's clear to all those who attended the hearings that something has to be done to address what he sees as the flaws within the OSSAA.